that the approval or yes votes have won over the base core territory of at least the current R plus whatever new additional territories. The transition period will already begin immediately. Upon the declaration by Comelec of the results, it will create the new bar, and that would begin the whole set of actions for the transition. Meaning to say that from that time on, the current ARM will be winding down, and the new bar, given the new set of appointments to the president of the PTA, will now come into force. So this will be a very quick, almost immediate period of transition, and how that transition will be effectively completed is going to be another matter, but I would say that immediately upon public declaration of Comelec, there will be the transition will begin. Mom?
Well, speaking of transition, I'd like to comment on the political transition. This is actually a watershed, not only in relation to the peace process, but also in relation to local politics. And of course, it has an implication for the national politics as well. Remember, we have a national and local elections in May. In certain places like Cotabato City, the results today will have an impact on those elections. Also in Isabela, as well as in the local positions within ARM. And the impact is not uniform in the sense that politicians who will be running these elections will surely be taking stock of the results of this plebiscite. They will make new plans, there will be realignments. And of course, in all of this, the MILF has basically raised its political staff, meaning in the coming May elections, the MILF will be an independent power that will have an impact on this election. I'm not saying that they can change the rules, but certainly they will be part of the rules, meaning their own position, who to support, who to oppose, etc., etc. We'll have to really assess. The second point I'd like to make is in impact on national politics. I think you're aware that there is a campaign for federalism. The MNLF has already come out that the more important political event for them is the transition to the federal setup. That will have an impact actually on the BOL or the party. But in Manila, there is already a process by which the executive will resume the campaign this year, even before any conference is in place. The president in November has created an interagency task force on federalism. This is trying to reconcile the many versions coming from the Conservative Commission, the PDP official version, not including the House, because the House version is from the Conservative side. But certainly the President has already been clear that he will endorse a single version from the Executive side. Now, this particular website basically says that only as far as the BO is concerned, that it is the framework for this website. But the whole peace process itself, with the MILF, and of course the MNLF, part of the consideration there is the shift to federalism. And one of the questions mark left over from this exercise is, what if federalism is in place, how will BAR be placed within it? Because it will certainly be a question, particularly in the light of the Supreme Court case, which the core question there is the constitutionality of the BOL. And certainly, a federal setup would answer most, if not all, of those questions, meaning the case would be rendered more academic. Considering that, from my vantage point, I think federalism will become an issue in the May elections. So that's also a political question, meaning the politicians here who will be affected by the plebiscite will still have to contend with that particular issue in May. And of course, after the election, that's another thing altogether. What I'm trying to say is that while we can say that this is an end of an era of the previous arm, but we are also entering another transition to not only to BAR, but a possible federal system. So the excitement is not yet over. Everybody will still be on their toes here in May, in the coming months, and possibly in years.
At saka kailangan nating isipin din na merong dalawang, the approval of the BAR also triggers the other question of the normalization ng MILF or ng Bangsamoro Islamic Armed Forces. As you know, the part of the parcel of a political settlement is the normalization of 30 to 40,000 MILF combatants and their communities. So, in the next few days, the MILF and the government would have to enter into that process again of what to do with 30 to 40,000 of the MILF combatants, because that as they shift to the political arena, there is really the Philippine government is looking at the decommissioning of the combatants of the MILF, because now they become political actors rather than armed actors. So yan ang dapat isipin din na hindi lang ang political transition, kundi itong security transition. Paano mabilisan at magkaroon din ng transition itong 30 to 40,000 of the combatants. So in the next few days, one can expect the MILF to submit to its counterparts in the Philippine government the list of 30 to 40,000 combatants, so that the process of decommissioning them from the armed force to civilian life will begin. And I think that's crucial because, as I said from the beginning, this is not just a mere political exercise. This is an exercise designed to eventually end the war in Mindanao. And therefore, it is not there is the twin action of political empowerment, but at the same time, the transformation of the combatants of the MILF. And in a sense, what Mon is saying is that we have now entered into a space where multiple complexities of political, security, and economic factors will come in because of the approval of the BAR. Ben?
We would like to ask Director James Jimenez for his updates.
Magandang umaga po. I'm sorry I'm late. First of all, let's start with the overall assessment by the Commission of the elections of the plebiscite. For the most part, the Comelec believes that the plebiscite was a success. We encountered no significant problems in any of the election areas, in any of the plebiscite areas, again with the exception of Cotabato. Cotabato has been a special case from the very beginning. As far as Cotabato is concerned, we had issues with a couple of polling places, specifically to do with the management of the crowds outside the polling place. Yesterday, Major General Subiana reported that there was a presence of non-voters in one particular place, RH2, where the presence of the non-voters exerted a kind of intimidating influence on other voters who were there as well. However, what Major General Subiana's men did was to clear the polling center, the voting center, of all of these extraneous personnel, and as a result, voting was able to proceed smoothly later during the day. Eventually, voting was concluded safely and relatively peacefully throughout, again, the plebiscite area. By 6:45, a majority of the places in the armed plebiscite area reported 100% completion of their counts. The counting by 6:45 last night, Cotabato was reported at 81% completion of the counting, and by around 9 in the evening, ballot boxes had already arrived in the canvassing center at the SKCC. Which brings me to the canvassing in Cotabato City. Canvassing in Cotabato City is, as of the moment, proceeding, having recessed last night at 1:30 a.m. They were able to actually formally start at 10 p.m. as they were awaiting the arrival of the ballot boxes as per instruction by the Comelec and back through a Comelec resolution. So we had to wait for the arrival of the ballot boxes and all of the election reports. At 10 p.m., the canvassing officially started. Of course, by 1:30 it was recessed, and 6 a.m. this morning it was reconvened. As of this moment, 74 precincts have already been canvassed out of 374. I'd like to say that again. 74 precincts have been canvassed out of 374. So canvassing will continue today. Of course, they will recess from time to time, but it will continue until all 374 results are canvassed. The canvass results will then be transmitted directly to Manila. At the same time, the provincial canvassing is also ongoing. And as of 7 o'clock this morning, the provincial canvassing reported that they were halfway done with the canvass for Maguindanao. Okay? Halfway done for the canvass of Maguindanao. I have no report yet from the regional canvassing, but it's expected that today the canvass reports will be coming in from Basulta and Lanao del Sur. For those of you who have not been to the SKCC yet, the canvassing for the regional results is happening at the Regional Legislative Assembly, which is across the street from the Cultural Center. The canvassing for the provincial results is happening in the ARM Regional Library, which is off to the side of the main auditorium of the Cultural Center, where right now the city canvass is taking place. Right? So again, 74 out of 374 for the city of Cotabato. Maguindanao is halfway done, and we believe that the regional canvassing will kick into high gear today. So, if there are any questions, I'd be glad to answer them now.
Questions? David?
Sir, good morning. There have been, I know this is a common scenario in many other electoral exercises, but there have been unofficial results coming out, posted on social media. How are we taking this, sir, in terms of how it would impact the final and official results?
We're taking them as unofficial and therefore no impact. Ultimately, in the past, we've had unofficial partial results. This is before automation. And always, the minute the official reports come out, everyone forgets what the unofficial ever said. So right now, if anything, it will have an impact on the public mood, I think. But it will not have an impact on the official results.
Is there a way we can address this to the public, sir? I mean, it is seen as conditioning the mind of the public. What advice, warning can we give to them in terms of how they should be taking these results?
As we always say, if they are unofficial, they are not really something that you want to bet anything on. No? Again, anyone can come up with a number and label it unofficial. Anyone can come up with a number and stick a Comelec sticker on there and say, this is it. But it is not it until it is the Comelec that releases it. So our advice to the public is not to be taken in by these announcements. Again, if they are coming from sources that you trust, then it's fine. That's fine for you. But in general, again, it is not something that we stand by. It's not something we sanction. And certainly it's not something we advise. Because no one has been authorized. Under our rules, Comelec will not announce unless it's complete.
Questions? Yes, sir.
To James Jimenez, you mentioned there were extremist elements cleared at one of the polling stations. Can you say which elements you're referring to? And is there any connection to the unexploded grenade that was found in that in a similar area?
Right. Major General Subiana mentioned that there were elements of the MILF who were in town for election day. He mentioned also that, number one, he knew that they were here, that his forces had been augmented as a result of that of their presence. Second, he knew also that they were wearing civilian clothes, that they were not armed, and that their presence in Cotabato was ostensibly to provide support for the vote. Speaking directly and specifically of the people who were in RH2, in the pilot school, there was no clear indication if they were the same group. He knew that there were MILF present in the city, but again, there's no confirmation that they were the same group that were in RH2. But those in RH2 did say, when interviewed by them, that they were not voters in that precinct, which means that they had voted elsewhere, but had converged on RH2 in order to provide, according to them, moral support for their fellows who were voting in that precinct. If you've been to the pilot school, then you know it is a huge place. And there's a lot of open space and there's a lot of room for people to just flow in and out of it. So I guess that helped. That helped the situation in the sense that it was easy to go in there and not be noticed. But again, just to clarify, yes, the presence of MILF individuals, of elements of MILF, was known here in Cotabato City, but they were in civilian clothes. They had no arms, and their presence was matched by an augmentation of the forces of the AFP. And finally, that the people in RH2 who were not voters of RH2 claimed to be voters of other places, and that they were simply there to provide support for their fellows who were voting the same way that they were.
Questions? Yes, ma'am. Can you please introduce yourself first?
Yes. Hi, I'm Joanna Balyaran of GG Press. Sir, yesterday there were several reports of vote buying and some other election-related offenses. Did anyone already file election-related complaints before the Comelec?
To my knowledge, no report has been filed yet.
Is there a process of protest for this plebiscite? Can you...
That process was explained yesterday by our Regional Director Ray Sumalipao, and his explanation basically goes that that the complaint has to be filed before the Comelec, and the Comelec will have to rule in the first instance on that. And then if the ruling is unsatisfactory to the parties, then they can proceed to the Comelec en banc on appeal. So again, the entry point is still the Comelec.
Questions? David, wala pa naman eh. Sige.
One last one. Sir, some of the teachers did receive text messages supposedly on the eve of the election, the night before election day, and supposedly threatening them not to report for duty. We were trying to dig in where these people could have gotten access of their numbers. The teachers were saying they submitted their numbers to Comelec and DepEd. Sir, is there a way that we can address this kind of concern of the teachers? Because somehow it bothered them for a while, for a certain point, on how they carry out their duties at the back of their heads. There's the threat to their security.
I understand, and not to sound flippant about it, I doubt that Comelec was the only one who knew their numbers. So it would be very hard to really isolate the Comelec as the source of the data that allowed them to be touched by these attempts. Having said that, it is of grave concern to us that teachers could be reached this way. And certainly when we talk to them, it's not something that they appreciated. And we will do everything in our power to make sure that those who are responsible are discovered. Again, this is to do that, to threaten the teachers and to prevent them from performing their duty as election workers. That's an assault on the democratic process, and no one should countenance that. So I hope that we can get a broad consensus on this among the stakeholders. This is not something that should be allowed, and that steps should be taken to prevent this in the future. As far as the Comelec is concerned, what we have seen is, and I'm sorry for the shameless plug, but with automated elections, we saw a decrease in the number of attempts to intimidate teachers this way. Basically because in an automated election regime, a lot of the decision-making is taken out of the hands of the teachers. But in this case, the teachers are burdened with a lot of decisions to make, and that makes them vulnerable to intimidation. So again, not going into the question of automation, I hope that in general we can all come together to work out a solution to prevent teachers from being harassed like this.
Any more question? Comments? Peaceful daw eh. Peaceful process daw eh. Okay.
In closing, I'd like to thank, of course, the members of the media and the international observer community for joining us here in Cotabato and the rest of the ARM. We believe that it is not an exaggeration to say that your presence has contributed much to the peacefulness of the elections, and we hope that we can see the same level of engagement from you in our next election, which is less than 4 months away. The May elections, of course, the midterm elections. So again, from the bottom of our institutional heart, as we say, maraming salamat po.
Okay, maraming salamat, Director James Jimenez. Okay. Sige. Okay, let me turn over the microphone to Professor Rufa Guiam, columnist of the PDI, Philippine Daily Inquirer, to just give her assessment.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the whole electorate of the region, the city, for maintaining high levels of determined action to vote and to exercise restraint on a general level. There would be transitional challenges that would be very, very difficult to tackle right after ratification or non-ratification. So I'm saying that the harder work begins after this exercise. I'd like to talk about least thought of and discussed thing in this plebiscite. I'm asking, was there a women's vote in this plebiscite? Nobody has asked a disaggregation of voters on how women voted in this plebiscite. I'm looking at it because I'm interested on its implications on the creation of a new region and how the women will be given voices to make decisions for running this new government. Because I have observed yesterday, as was going around the city, that there were a lot of women. In fact, Pancho also reported that there were several women in Parang, was it in Parang, brought their children along in the polling places. So that showed to you how determined these women are to participate in this election, no matter how difficult it is for them to walk several kilometers away to the polling places. So, but I'd like to see whether this high level of women participation, and not to forget that the majority of the election officials assigned in the precincts are also women, female teachers. So I'd like to see how this dynamic of the women's vote will be translated into a bigger voice of women in the running of the new region. How will women be represented, and will their voices count in the running of the affairs? Will gender relations be improved with a new government? Because I'd like to see that since we are constructing a new region, we would like to see some kind of a building back better kind of approach, especially regarding to gender relations, more equitable relations between men and women as far as governance is concerned for the region. So I'm going to look at that as a point of interest from now on. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Francisco Lara of International Alert.
Just very briefly, there were 95 incidents of election-related violence yesterday across the Bangsamoro, but they were so minor in nature that I suppose the press did not focus on them, except for the big ones. The grenade throwing, the unexploded ordinance yesterday, cases of fistfights in many places, from Cotabato to Basilan to Tawi-Tawi, including cases of ballot snatching, but very few in the case of Tawi-Tawi, which makes everyone conclude that this was probably the most peaceful exercise, democratic exercise in the Bangsamoro since the last decade. However, there is something that is of notice in what happened, and that is to look at the places which have been identified previously as hotspots of violent extremism. Butik, for example, had 11,207 yes votes and 0 no votes. We wonder whether this was an actual choice made out of their freedom and analysis of their situation under the new Bangsamoro. This was more because they did not want to project themselves and identify themselves as opposing anything that remotely concerns the support of the national state. No? In the SPMS box, we saw wide, very massive victories for the yes votes, including in Mamasapano, in Sharif Saidona, Aguac, etc. Finally, we also saw in the Iranon corridor, as Rufa already mentioned, a very festive atmosphere, a lot of optimism, entire families joining the plebiscite, and as I mentioned yesterday, a near total shutout of the no vote in the entire Iranon corridor. There is any base which actually must be the focus of any future Bangsamoro government. It is the Iranon corridor for all the hopes and its delivery of a solid yes vote in this plebiscite. Thank you.
Okay, are there questions or for our resource persons? Yes, Avi. Just the microphone, yeah.
I don't know, this is a
Please
hypothetical.
introduce yourself, Ali.
I'm Ali Ayub, I'm wearing different hats. Now I'm wearing a academician hat. I just want to ask, this is hypothetical. Attorney Bong and Attorney Bacani, we were together during the negotiations about the normalization and also the exit agreement. What's the benchmark that we can say that the MI can sign the exit agreement? Because it's parallel to the implementation of all the agreements. That's one. Second point I would like to ask, if yes will be overwhelming, is the petition in the Supreme Court will be moot and academic? Thank you.
Well, the benchmark is basically, it's almost like a set of boxes that both the government and the MILF will tick off. But a major part of this is really all the actions of normalization. The commissioning of combatants, amnesty is also important. A lot of we cannot, side by side with the commissioning is amnesty, making sure that those who have pending cases as related to the rebellion or revolution will also be granted amnesty. Otherwise, they will not agree to be decommissioned. There's also a set of activities for the transformation of the camps. Immediately 6 camps, but it should include the 32 camps of the MILF. And so there are certain milestones that need to be needed and need to be ticked off. And that's why I'm saying that while everyone's attention is focused and rightfully focused on the plebiscite results, one should look at it from a broader perspective of peace building and ending the war. And then therefore, in as much as we generate much interest in having the BOL approved or the BARM established, the other side of the flip coin of transitional government is really normalization. And the challenge for the MILF, given the size of the MILF and the people who have been working with the MILF, is that to be able to look at this twin equally important work of normalization and transition government and put equal attention to it, because they need to drive this forward. There can be no effective governance without without normalization, because then, if that happens, then you will see that the 30 to 40,000 combatants will ask themselves, now that we have established the Bangsamoro government, what will be our future? What will happen to us? Will there be education? Will there be jobs? Will there be health services? What will happen to all the cases, so on and so forth? So it requires really the balancing of those two interests, and that is where everyone's talent and wisdom is required to balance the twin interests of establishing a new BARM, but at the same time making sure that the combatants are not left behind. For the legal, then.
We cannot comment on the merits of the petition, but just for purposes of an academic, the discussion and talking
What
about...
you're watching now is a press conference of the Comelec and some civic leaders in their assessment of the Bangsamoro plebiscite that happened yesterday. According to some analysts, they saw a massive victory for the yes vote in the plebiscite yesterday. One also said that they saw a near total shutout of the no vote, and that it is the most peaceful democratic exercise in the Bangsamoro region. Right now, they are facing the media answering some questions, but the Comelec clarifies that social media posts on plebiscite results are unofficial, and Comelec will be the one to be declaring the official results. Comelec also confirms the presence of the MILF elements in Cotabato City. They said that there are no plebiscite-related complaints so far and that the threats to the teachers is an assault to the democratic process. Please stay tuned for more stories on the plebiscite. Stay tuned for The Source. It's coming up next. I'm Cherry Mercado. Good morning.